Welcome to Ask Earl Anything. This is the show where your questions make the show. Without your questions, we do not have a show. This is for March 2025. Can you believe it's 2025? Incredible. 8th year of Ask Earl Anything. Please like and subscribe. I'm saying that out front. I've done 2 mini Ask Earl Anythings so far. And it's a format I'm going to continue in for some of the extra questions, and I'm going to try to have a bigger Ask Earl Anything. So this is the bigger Ask Earl Anything. And I've got a bunch of questions. These are left over from February. Some of my longtime friends and listeners are here. I'm trying a couple things out on this. I'm actually recording with my lapel mic to the camera. I'm also recording with the mic over my head that's out of camera, I think. You may see it. It's way up here somewhere. The 2 Ask Earl Anything minis that I did were playing episodes. I was demonstrating 2 things. One was using rudiments in basic drumming, and the other one was about the song Drummer Man by Nancy Sinatra. So I ask you to check those out. Let's jump into this month's questions, and if there's any playing, I will do some playing. I'm not sure if there's any playing left in the examples or not. Most of them seem to be questions that were directed at me to answer. So I think I left them there. Remember, if you have a question, please ask the question. You can do it in any of my videos that I post every day, and I will try to get to that as soon as possible. If you have a playing example question, I may do a mini class, because these playing examples do take some playing to do it. And this is the first time I'm actually recording Ask Earl Anything with the overhead mic, with the lapel mic, and gonna try to throw some drumming in if I can. That's why I'm recording it in Logic. Sometimes Logic doesn't play nice. When Logic doesn't play nice, it just dies on me. So I've always got the camera as the backup now. One of my subscribers and friends, Lutz, Continuum Drums from Germany, said move the lapel mic closer to up here versus down here. So I hope that's helping. Plus, I'm less likely when I do this to actually cover the microphone, which I did the last time I used the lapel mic. So we're trying this again. So let's jump in. The first question comes from a good friend, Greg Oneoff. He does have my phone number. And his question, I thought it was an interesting question, a rather long comment into a question. It was about his 7-year-old grandson has shown a bit of interest in being drumming. Here, if he ever wants to learn, would you recommend him learning open-handed rather than the way we all learned? Would there be an advantage to learning this way? That's the question. So let's talk about open-handed drumming. Now, the concept is with open-handed drumming, you're playing this way. I have some good friends that watch the show, one of them being CCM Drummer, who's a proponent of open-handed drumming. I think if you learn open-handed drumming from a young age, it's to your advantage. I think if you are a lefty and you're learning to play drums, I think it is to your advantage to learn to play left-handed drums on a right-handed kit and play open-handed, meaning train your right foot to play the kick drum. Drummers that do that have an easier time of it than if they don't do that. Now, Ringo Starr is the most famous left-handed drummer there ever was. He played on a right-hand kit, and he did not play open-handed. But open-handed drumming is guys like Billy Cobham, Lenny White. Those are the first 2 examples I have. Simon Phillips. And there's a myriad of drummers today that do open-handed drumming. I think there are advantages to playing this way. But I think when it comes to a young child, let the young child figure out what they want to do at first. If you force them into doing something that's unnatural to them, if they naturally pick up the sticks and go this way with it, then you are going to have different issues where they may not want to stay in it. So really go with what the young drummer wants and looks like, unless you're one of those teachers that has to teach your method and force them into it, and hopefully that drummer will stay engaged and want to stay in it. At 6, 7 years old, I don't think so. Now, if you have a drummer that's 10, 11 years old, is a natural lefty, pushing them towards open-handed is a great idea. but forcing a right-handed drummer to play open-handed may not work. That's just my feelings on that. So that's my suggestion to you, Greg. Encourage him that way. Show him that way. I'm working on open-handed drumming, but I will never get my open-handed drumming to sound like my style of playing drums for the last 50 years. So I know that. So I don't hesitate to say that I am not going to switch to playing open-handed for all the things, all the different styles of music I play. Every once in a while, I'll play an open-handed type groove in a song that I think I can make it work. But if I want nuance, I've got to turn the right hand over the hi-hat. That's just what works. So that's what works for me. Anyhow, Greg, great question and a great concept. All right, my next question comes from my friend Jeff Metz. Jeff's also got my phone number, but this came through one of the questions. It was on the last Ask Earl Anything. Jeff said, here's the question, after a long, lengthy comment. He said, if you were approached by any company for an endorsement, which one would be the least, which one would you be least excited about? Let's say cymbals or drums. Okay, another great question. Now, there was a point in my career where I thought about endorsements. When I thought about endorsements back in the 80s, I started buying Sabian cymbals, by the way. Sabian cymbals were about $15 cheaper than Zildjians back in the 80s. And I thought they were just the same as Zildjians, which they are just the same as Zildjians. They're made of that B20 alloy. And back in the 80s, they were really close to Zildjians. Matter of fact, they were the Canadian brother to the Zildjian factory in Massachusetts. So in the 70s, there was something called a Canadian K. That's when they flew over Kerope and the other cymbal makers from Istanbul and put them up in Canada and said, start making Canadian Ks until Avedis died. When Zildjian died, that changed everything. And the brothers split the business up. Armand kept the business in the United States. Robert Zildjian took the business in Canada, turned the factory in New Brunswick, Canada into the Sabian factory, named it after his kids. It's a famous story, you know, Sally, Billy, and Andy, and that's how you got Sabian. So when I started playing Sabian in the 80s, I knew that Sabians were nothing more than Zildjians, but a little cheaper. So I thought they were great cymbals. Plus the HHs, which is what I bought, my Sabians were all HHs. They were like the Canadian Ks. They even had the script, ride cymbal, medium ride, thin crash, was the same you found on the Canadian Ks that had the K like the Keropes. So just like the Kerope. I can see that Kerope there, but it's backwards. Can't make it work. But you get the idea. If you've seen the Kerope logo, that's what the Canadian K logo looked like, that K. So with that being said, I was thinking about a Sabian endorsement at that time. Now, I didn't know about drums, and I think if I got a drum endorsement from a Pearl or a Tama, Yamaha for sure, Gretsch, Ludwig, Slingerland was kind of gone at that point by the late 80s. Rogers was gone by that point in time. If I got any kind of drum endorsement at that point, I would have taken it just about at that point in time. But there were still companies that I wouldn't have kind of went for back in the 80s, like Maxwin by Pearl. That was the lower line drums that were made in China for Pearl. With that being said, so I did have some standards, is what I'm trying to say. You had standards. So what wouldn't I want today from a drummer cymbal endorsement? Like, truth of the matter is, really the only endorsements that I would really want to get from a cymbal company right now is Paiste, or if UFIP was to call me up and say, hey, we'd like to give you cymbals, we'll give you a deal on them. I might actually go for UFIP. I think UFIPs are kind of cool cymbals. But Zildjians and Sabians right now, not so much. I'm not excited about that. But if they came knocking at the door, I might take them. Meinl has not turned me on, believe it or not, even though I've never played Meinl cymbals. And I'm not saying they're bad cymbals, but I think everybody's playing Meinl cymbals these days. So any of the big boys, I would take an endorsement from in actuality, probably. But the most exciting would be Paiste to me, because I really like Paiste cymbals. And UFIPs, I think, are a really unique cymbal, and I think they're great cymbals. I'd love to play those cymbals. But I could tell you right now, any of the B20, BC lines of cymbals, I have no desire to have an endorsement with. Be it anything from Saluda, Soul Tone. Those are not endorsements to me that I would want, so I wouldn't take. From a drum perspective, I think there was one that was going around for a while out there, D drum. I can't see me playing D drums. Those are drums I would not want to play. I've looked at them. I don't really. I mean, I've had a couple friends that had D drum endorsements. It's just not my thing. I'd rather play my Gretsch drums rather than say I'm going to play somebody's drums and not want it. I don't need an endorsement, is what I'm saying. So I don't really think about these things, but I don't see D drum knocking on the door saying, "Hey, you want a drum endorsement?" And that's the truth of the matter. The big boys, of course, if they came knocking, I would consider. But endorsements have rules, and I know I don't fall into any of the rules. You know, I mean, to get an endorsement, you got to be seen. If you're not seen a lot, then there's no reason for giving you an endorsement. 10,000 subscribers is not endorsement level. Now, what endorsement would I love to have that's not a drum or cymbal company? I would love to have a D'Addario endorsement, because I would get heads and sticks. And heads and sticks are something I go through a lot. So having that endorsement would be great. Or a Remo endorsement, or a Vader endorsement. Now, those are my preferred places to get endorsements, to be honest. I love Remo heads. I could really love Evans heads. Evans heads are fine. I could like Aquarian heads, but I've never really gone down that road, other than this kit does have Aquarian heads on it. But they're not bad heads either, okay? But I think that a D'Addario endorsement would be the most desirable endorsement for me at this point in time, because with D'Addario, you would get Evans heads, which are really good heads. By the way, Aquarian and Remo are really good heads. And the other side of it would be the sticks, which are ProMark, and I've come to really like ProMark sticks. But I like Vader just as much, okay? Vic Firths are fine. They're great sticks. I have plenty of pairs of Vic Firths hanging around here too. But I don't see me getting a Vic Firth deal, and I don't think they're any better than ProMark or Vader, to be honest. So, truth of the matter is, playing what I want to play is really the coolest thing of all, and having the money to play what I want to play is really great too. So I'm grateful for what I have. I have plenty of cool instruments around here. And how many instruments do you need? That's a whole nother thing. Now, I've had one endorsement in my career. It was DMR Custom Drums. This snare drum is a DMR Solid cast aluminum snare drum. My friend Dan Ratelli made the snare drum for me. I don't think I'm messing with that mic. Here it is. It's matte black, okay, but it is an aluminum snare drum, cast aluminum. It was the shell was made in the factory of the Peace drums, the Taiwan drums, where they make the same shell for Gretsch and the same shell for DW. It is quite heavy. It's not as heavy as a bell brass, but this is probably 12, 13 pounds easily, maybe more. And it is a massively cool sounding drum. So I've had an endorsement, DMR Custom Drums. Dan was a great guy. It was a custom drum company. But endorsements, also pro-level endorsements, you might get gear or you may pay a very discounted price. That's really what you're getting in an endorsement deal, and they're getting something from you. That's the other way endorsements work. So I've had an endorsement deal, but I didn't parlay that into getting something else. Usually when you get one endorsement deal, then you start querying everybody to try to get more endorsements. I did not do that. Dan was a friend. We became friends and I endorsed his product. But I love my snare drums. I've got 2 DMR snare drums. I had a third one, but I gave it to a good jazz friend of mine who liked the 4-inch that I did not play that much, so I gave it to him. That's just who I am. You know what I mean? So anyhow, Jeff, thank you for that. All right, next question. This is on the song Can't Fight This Feeling Any Longer. This is from a new friend. His name is Spags. He said, man, all those fiberglass pearl uncovered concert toms. I have a 1971 fiberglass kit, 13, 16, 22, and an 8, 10, 13, 14 concert tom. Still looking for the 4 other drums. Spags, definitely something to be looking for. By the way, my concert tom journey, I've done a bunch of videos on my concert tom journey. One of the things I want to say about the Pearl concert toms, their fiberglass drums are different than the Blamire shells or the Tama shells or the 5 shells. I think they're a little thinner than all those, but they are great sounding drums, and I love my concert tom kit. It took me years to get my full set of concert toms. Matter of fact, I just got that completed in 2023 when I picked up a 6.5, a 5.5 by 6, and a 5.5 by 8 concert tom. I have 2 8s now. I have 3 10s, and I've got all the rest of them, 6 through 18. The 18 floor tom I love. It's huge. I've always wanted an 18-inch floor tom for my Gretsch kit. Never got it, but I got it out for the Pearl. I took all the coverings off because it looks cool, and I didn't have all the same color. I will tell you the blue color is the coolest color. I wish my floor tom was blue. I have 2 concert toms that were blue. But in actuality, they're fine the way they are. At one point in time, I was going to paint them. I don't think I'll ever paint them, to be honest. I like them the way they are. I don't care to have something, just to have something and call it collectors. I'm not a collector. I'm not a vintage drum collector, but I love vintage drums. So you've got a very cool kit in that fiberglass kit, 13, 16, 22. And if I could find the right price for a 13, 16, 22 kit, I would buy the 13, 16, 22 and then put all the toms around it. You know, I'd love to have a 22-inch fiberglass kick drum. But at this point in time, I've only run into one fiberglass kick drum. It was orange. I found it in a little music store in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. And I was going to buy it. It was for $100. The problem was it was going to cost me $250 to ship it. And that's when I said, nah, forget about it. And I left it. But I would love to have had that 26-inch bass drum to go with all these concert toms. That would have been really cool. But as they say, I'll have to live with what I have. Presently, the concert tom kit does have a 22-inch Gretsch kick drum. So that's what I'm using with all the concert toms. Thanks, Spags, for the comment that I just turned into a question because I love talking about the fiberglass drums. Now, I have another question about fiberglass drums. This comes from Hot Rod Tiki 200. Great show. Why do most concert tom kits have drum heads on the front bass drum? I know Phil Collins used to cut open his front head almost to the edge. Were there any concert tom kits made without front lugs? Thanks. Okay, was there a concert tom kit that was made with a bass drum that only had single lugs? Yes, Slingerland made a kit, and it had an aluminum inside the bass drum, believe it or not, and I'm going to show you a picture of it from a catalog. Danny Seraphim was in the picture of the 76 catalog, but this kit came out before Danny Seraphim was an endorser. Slingerland was making a kit that went together. It was like a travel kit. And the original travel kit had a 9x10, I believe, 9x13, and then a 14x16 floor tom, and I think it was a 20-inch kick drum, and they were all single-headed. And they all kind of went inside each other. It was a travel kit. Later on, they would make a kit with a 8x12, 9x13, 16x14 floor tom, and it would have a 22-inch kick drum with just no front head. That's the only kit I ever remember seeing in a catalog that had no front head. Now, the no front head concept came from Hal Blaine. Hal Blaine, who was the inventor of the modern day monster kit. Okay, he wasn't the first guy to play concert toms, by the way. There were concert toms before Hal Blaine was playing the Monster kit. But Hal Blaine said, I want a set of drums that has an octave of sound so I can make up melodies on the drums. That was his thing. That's Hal's Monster kit. But there were other drummers that used single-headed toms, like Chico Hamilton back in the 50s, early 60s, who had these kind of single-headed kits. Gretsch was making them, just two toms or three toms. Eventually, Chico had a bunch of extra little toms too. But Hal, in the studio, took the front head off. But when Hal took the front head off, he had a way using, I think it was a rubber gasket from a tire or something, that he kind of put between the lugs and the edge of the shell, and then he put the bass drum rim back on the shell, and he tightened it down so the bass drum rim was still attached to the shell without a bass drum head on it. And he used that in the studio. That was one of his Blue Sparkle kits. And I went to Nashville to the Musicians Hall of Fame and saw that kit, and I saw how it was set up. It was kind of cool. He was the one who really liked to do the no front bass drum head. Now, same thing happened with Phil Collins. He didn't really want a bass drum head, but he cut it almost to the edges and kept the rims on it, and then used the bass drum with almost no bass drum head on it at all. Back in the 70s, the big hole was in the center a lot of times. Not off to the side, not a small hole. It was a big hole in the center, sometimes 12 inches, sometimes bigger. So guys were putting nothing or putting a pillow in the bass drum, but they were getting that single-headed bass drum sound. So yes, they did make kits. Slingerland made one that had no lugs on the front, so there was no way to put a front bass drum head on it, but it wasn't very common. And most of the concert tom kits had lugs on it and a front head. So you're correct in saying that. Great question, Hot Rod Tiki. Thanks for the question again. All right, next question comes from Bill VY3FX. He said this, here's the question. When playing on top or back of the beat, I assume the hi-hat stays on the beat for a reference point, correct? However, are both the bass and the snare playing on top of the beat or just the snare? In short, playing a basic pattern on top of the beat, do I play the snare on top or both the bass and the snare? What does the hi-hat do? I keep hearing different answers on this subject from drummers. So what we're talking about is playing behind the beat with a click track, I assume. I think when you're playing with a click track and you're looking at a grid, I think it's pretty hard to not bring the hi-hat with you, but I know what you're talking about. Some guys think it sounds like this. So I'm going to try to demonstrate playing a little bit back with the snare drum, but to really hear this, you really have to overemphasize it, probably to the point where it's not musical. What we're talking about is relaxing the track. When guys talk about playing behind the beat, what they're saying is you're not pushing the music forward. Now, this is where having a DAW is really important. If you have a DAW, you can see how you naturally play. This is why I know that I was not going to make it in Nashville, by the way. Especially after having Pro Tools and Logic now in DAWs, I have a natural tendency to play with a click and put the bass drum a little bit on the front side, not the back. Truthfully, if you're practicing with a metronome and you're practicing with a DAW, make sure your kick drum is relaxed and on the beat. It has to be on the beat. That snare drum is the feel thing. What you're trying to do with that snare is just lay it slightly back. What are you doing by slaying it slightly back? What you're doing is you're relaxing the groove as opposed to being on top of the groove. Now, I don't have a metronome set up, okay? So without a metronome, it's really hard to understand, but let me try to do it without a metronome and see if this makes any sense to you. So let's try a groove where I'm playing it down the middle or a little pushed, like my natural feel, by the way. Now I'm going to try to lay it back a little bit. Just lay the beat back a hair. And I am playing a faster beat. We'll try it at a slower tempo too. So, what we're really talking about when we talk about playing behind the beat, we're talking about getting a relaxed groove. Where this is really super important is when you're playing ballads, is that you don't want to feel like you're pushing the tempo. Now, caveat this. It's really hard to talk about this unless you're talking about recording a track together in the studio and today with a click to really understand how this works. But if you listen to country records, listen to some country records, find those records that are somewhere between 80 and 70 beats per minute. And what you'll hear a lot of the country drummers doing, if you put a click on it, you'll hear that their snare drum is a little bit back. Now, is the hi-hat with them or not with them? That's the question you're asking. I think it depends on the drummer, to be honest. But the effect that we're going for when we talk about laying the snare back a hair, and we're talking about milliseconds, we're not talking about way back, you're not an eighth note off or a 16th note off, is you're talking about making the track feel relaxed, not feel hyper. And the reason why I'm telling you listen to modern country, like anywhere from 2000s on, or maybe even the 90s on, if you listen to guys like Paul Lime and stuff, from those periods where the click was dominant. Click became dominant music after the drum machine really hit in the 80s. So anytime from 85 on, click is very dominant. But click on 24-track tape is totally different than click on Pro Tools. Meaning, Pro Tools, you see it. 24-track tape, they were hearing it. So if they were burying the click, they knew they were dead on it. And rarely were they dead on the click. Okay? There's few guys that tell stories, like JR's got a story about him and Louis Johnson being on a track once, and they buried the click the whole way through, and they couldn't hear the click. And that was like amazing to him. He acted like it was amazing when he told me the story. Like, we were dead on the click, and it was buried, and we couldn't hear it. And if you bury the click, you are dead on the click. Most people are somewhere around the click. The key is your ones you have to lay that kick drum on one. It has to be solidly on the beat. The snare can be pulled a little bit back, but that's to relax the groove. You don't want to feel hyper where you're pushing the groove. But if you listen to ballads from the 70s, early 80s, before clicks, you will hear the verse will be slower, and then the tempo will pick up in the chorus, and then they'll come out of the fill and they'll come back and they'll pull the tempo back again for the verse, and then they push the chorus. And there was this natural push and pull that happened in the music. And some of the guys that were masters at this were guys like Jim Gordon, Jeff Beccaro, Jim Keltner, Steve Gadd, Rick Marotta. And again, these are also guys that knew how to lay back the beat and make it feel relaxed. That's the key to the whole thing about backbeat, pulling it back, is making the track feel relaxed. So that's the mystery of it. But if you're looking on a grid, you want that snare to be just a hair, and you want your kick to be dead on ones. Your ones have got to be dead on the beat. If you're pushing ahead, you're pushing. By the way, my natural tendency is to push the one. I've learned that. That's a tough thing to learn. That's probably why I would not make it as a studio drummer in Nashville. And I kind of know it. All right. I hope that helps the question and answers the question. So it's a great question. But it is this mystery, like everybody talks about playing behind the beat. Really what they're talking about is making it feel relaxed, not feel on edge. If you're pushing tempo, you're feeling on edge. By the way, the drummer today in today's music has to be dead on the click for the most part. because what's going to happen is the other musicians are going to make the feel of a song, and they're going to play around that click a little ahead, a little behind. They can get away with things unless they're the first in, and usually it's the drummer that's first in, and that's the point. The drummer has to be perfect. I have a good friend of mine who does a lot of work with Nashville musicians and some LA musicians, and he told me flat out he has to have his tracks perfect before he sends them there for them to build these tracks that he's writing. That's the bottom line. It has to be dead on, meaning he's got to go in and fix things and make it perfect. Otherwise, they won't record on it. Nashville guys are not going to record on stuff that's all over the place, or they're going to say, let me record my stuff dead on with a click. I was watching this guitar player I follow on YouTube who does a lot of Nashville sessions, and when he does those sessions and he's doing these chord parts for acoustic guitar stuff for songs, writing the song right there for the artist, he basically makes sure he's dead on the click, because everything else that gets added on, it's going to be around that click. But the first one in's got to be dead on. So your percussion and your drums got to be dead on usually. Unless they get put on way late, then they can have a little leeway. But drummers usually don't get that leeway. So drummers got to nail it from square one, especially if you're recording. Now live with a click, it's a different world. Everybody's playing together, and that's different when you're playing together than playing separate tracks locked onto a 24 track or onto a Pro Tools, Logic, DAW. It's a totally different thing. Two different worlds. So, all right, next question comes from my friend Mickey F3730. Awesome job, my friend. How are your rack toms mounted? You've probably mentioned this before, but I can't quite see how they're mounted. And this is on Gladys Knight and the Pips, You're the Best Thing. All right, so this was not on this kit. By the way, I mount my toms various different ways depending on the kit. The kit I did, You're the Best Thing by Gladys Knight and the Pips, was the Gretsch Walnut kit. I had a 10-inch tom that was mounted off of a cymbal stand. It had a Yamaha mount, and it had another boom arm coming out of one side, and the Pearl. I used the Pearl 7/8 hardware on my drums. Now, some guys will say, those are Gretsch drums from the 70s. Why does it have Pearl hardware? The reason it has Pearl hardware has to do with the fact they said you don't want the Gretsch hardware, which was pretty terrible. So I bought instead the Pearl hardware, which is what they were putting on. In early parts of the 70s, they were putting Ludwig hardware on. Matter of fact, this little Gretsch bass drum has a Ludwig mount that goes on it. They also put on Rogers hardware. They also put on Slingerland hardware. They would put anything on Gretsch drums except for the Gretsch hardware, which was so terrible. So I got Pearl hardware, 7/8, and back then it went through the shell, so I've got all my shells are drilled with 7/8 hardware. I eventually put rims mounts on in the late 80s after I came back from Nashville and did a record. So my drums are mounted with 7/8 hardware to rims mounts with 7/8 holes. And the bass drum does have a mount for the 7/8 hardware that was installed at the time of the purchase of the drum kit. So that Pearl mount is original. We got a virgin shell Gretsch bass drum in, and they basically drilled it for the Pearl hardware, and I got it on my toms on there. And then the other arm is mounted off of a cymbal stand. So that's how I use it. Concert tom kit is very similar. Most of the concert tom kit is mounted off of 7/8 hardware with rims mounts, except for the 6 and the 8-inch tom, which are on a clip mount on a stand. Originally, all those drums were on clip mounts, but you don't want to use clip mounts if you want to get your drums where you want them. But thanks for asking the question, Mickey. Appreciate it. Next question comes from Brent 3760. This was on Drummer Man Nancy Sinatra, the original cover I did with the concert tom kit. He said, are you mixing Pisces and Zildjians? And for that particular song, I brought this cymbal, the Armand Beautiful Baby. With the sizzles. And yes, I was mixing. Now, I don't traditionally mix my Pisces and my Zildjians, but I could. I occasionally use different China cymbals. I have a bunch of China cymbals. I only have one really nice Paiste China cymbal, and the other Paiste China cymbal I have is kind of beat up, so I don't use it very much. It's kind of retired, my 16-inch signature China. But I also have, I have a couple Wuhans. I got a 20 and an 18 Wuhan. And I've got a Tosco by Sabian 18-inch China. And I have been putting them with the Paiste crashes and rides and hi-hats. But usually I don't mix them. This kit's got all Zildjians on it today. This is my 14-inch New Beats, my 19-inch Kerope, my 19-inch Beautiful Baby which is a ride cymbal, by the way, with rivets, my 22-inch Avedis, and this is my Timothy Roberts modified 20-inch flat top ride that my friend Pat gave me. They're all Zildjians. This was a Zildjian alloy. This was just modified. So with that being said, I normally don't mix and match, but I can. I have plenty of cymbals around here to mix and match. It all depends on what you want to do. When I was younger, I used Paistes and Zildjians together all the time, or Paistes and Sabians all the time. For years, I used Rude hi-hats with my Sabian cymbals. So it's not uncommon to do that, and it's not against the rules. But as I've gotten older, I like playing one brands of cymbals. So this is kind of the Zildjian setup. I've got a Sabian setup. I've got a couple Paiste setups. It makes me happy to play them as setups. Makes me feel like an endorser in some ways because I'm able to play all one brand of cymbals, so that's kind of cool. But mixing and matching is fine. It's just like mixing and matching heads, you know. I tend to like Remo heads for snare drums, but you know I can use anything on a tom, doesn't matter. And kick drums, I like Evans EMADs. I have an EMAD on the 20, I got an EMAD on this 18. I've got an Evans EQ4. I think it's an EQ4. On that kick drum in there. I've had other heads on there. So again, mixing and matching of percussion is fine, but for the most part, I don't do that very often. On Drummer Man, I needed a sizzle cymbal. I could have went to the 20-inch ride I have. That's a sizzle ride, Paiste 602. But I said, nah, let's grab this. This was right here on the kit, pulled it off, put it up there as a crash and hit it. It worked perfectly. So sometimes the right sound is the right sound. That's the way I look at it. All right, Brent, thanks for the question. I got two more questions. All right, next question comes from Dana Romero, 5281. I don't know what song we were doing. He says, how do you keep up that speed lifting weights? Laugh out loud. This was, I believe this was, I Keep Forgetting. If you know anything about I Keep Forgetting, I was playing the 16th note grooves. By the way, that was a drum talk, but it was actually an Ask Earl Anything mini in some respects, because guys were asking me, how do you do that? And I think this was the question where it came from, to be honest. I was talking to Tate Berkey, and he was talking to me about there's a hand movement where you're basically, and this is what I use when I do I Keep Forgetting, where you're basically push and pulling in with your right hand. And there's a technique and a name for it. I'm not technical. I hope you guys all realize this. I don't like rattle off technique stuff. But I will tell you that I have been working on the Murray Spivak stuff. Murray Spivak had this technique with his hands. I realize my hands fall into this more times than not. So I'm working on that. But basically, there's some finger control in this I Keep Forgetting groove. So... So, I think that it's not so much weightlifting, but it's working on technique with a pad. And again, I did a whole lesson on that I Keep Forgetting groove, and it was actually on the song. It was actually Love's theme is what it was. Sounds like a double-handed thing, but Ed Green played a single-handed groove. I happen to know that from the source this time. Ed Green was playing it a single-handed groove on Love's Theme. So I did it double-handed, worked fine, it sounded good. I decided to go with the single-handed groove just to see if I could do it. I couldn't keep it exactly like Ed did, but I think even Ed kind of knew how to put the breaths in. The breaths came with the hi-hat opens. And those breaths give you the space to make it feel right. And Ed's groove is just immaculate on Love's Theme. So study Barry White, Ed Green. That's a study in Ed Green, who, by the way, played on Steely Dan's Asia. I believe his song was I Got the News. Check that out, too, for Ed Green. There's tons of other stuff Ed Green played on, but definitely worth checking out. But practice with a pad. All right, last song comes from Aeronoffel, which is Joel. I call him Joel. He said, can you show what you need to use in-ear monitors, IEMs? Can you show what you need to use IEMs and how to connect them also? Offer a moderately priced setup. Thanks for the advice, Joel. Okay. Okay, Joel, let's talk about in-ear monitors. Now, if you want a set of in-ear monitors like I have, these are quite expensive these days. Now, I bought these over 10 years ago. They were about $420 when it came shipped to me. I also got an extra cord because cords go. But these are 1964 years triple drivers. Today, triple drivers cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $800 or $900, and these are molded to my ears. I actually went to an audiologist, had them put wax in my ears and make a mold, and then I sent them to now they're called 64 ears, and they made this mold and they made me my in-ear monitors. These are excellent in-ear monitors that fit my ears perfectly, and they are giving me 30 dB down noise reduction. So all of my sound comes through my system. Now, to run an in-ear monitor system means you've got to have a preamp somewhere from the board with a volume knob. I happen to have a little box over by the main drum kit that has 4 outputs. One goes to that studio, one comes over on the line to this. It's basically this cable right here. As you can see, the cable's in my pocket, okay? And I keep it pretty far down. It's not even halfway, and I get plenty of volume. The key with in-ear monitors, before you put them in your ears, you turn the volume off and then you adjust the volume. If you don't do that, you run the risk of blowing your ears. And that is not a good feeling. In-ear monitors, if you use the volume at the right level where you don't blow your ears out, can be incredibly useful and easy to manage, but you've got to know where the volume knob is. That's why when I play in churches, I want to know where the volume knob is, and I want to make sure my in-ears volume is down before I push it up. Because you do not want to put these things in your ears, because they're in your ears, without making sure you know where the volume is. The second thing is, are there other types of in-ear monitors other than the molded ones? Yes, there are. I just had a friend of mine called me up, my friend Pat this week, actually called me up and was talking to me about in-ears. You can get in-ears as cheap as $30. Behringer makes a set of $30 in-ear monitors. I don't know if they're any good. The standard for years was these Shure 215s is what they were called. They're about $99. They're a standard for semi-pro players that use in-ear monitors in churches. They've been using them for years that way. My first experience with the 215s was not a good one. I had the foam. I put them in my ears and I did not like the way they felt or sounded. I went back to my headphones that day. And that's when I decided I'm going to get in-ears and figure out how to use these things. All I can say about the in-ears is you've got to have volume control. So if you're using in-ears and you're taking a lead from a board or from your DAW, you run a cable over to a headphone amplifier. They cost somewhere between, I don't know, you can get them probably as cheap as $50 and get them as expensive as hundreds of dollars, depending on what you're looking at. Mine is a little Samson box. I also have another box with a whole set of 6 of them. I'm not sure what they are either. I can't even remember the name of it. It's been so long since I bought these things. I've had them for years in my studio. But you've got to have something with a volume control, and you've got to make sure you don't blow your ears out. That's the key to the whole thing. You're also going to need a good headphone extension because in-ears only go so far. Usually you're lucky if this cable is longer than 6 feet. That's it. So with that being said, headphone extension, going to the amplifier, make sure you know your volume settings. Now, by the way, nobody touches my volume settings. I don't really go touching it either very often. And all my grandkids know don't touch my knobs. Literally. Don't touch the knobs in my studio on my preamps. Don't touch the knobs on anything. But that's the scariest thing, is putting these things in your ears with music on super loud and it blows your ears out. That's what you don't want to do. That's the only thing you need to know about in-ear monitors. And if you're careful and you control the volume, they can really work really well. They can block out noise. And the other thing you really need to have for in-ear monitors is you've got to have a way to hear your drums through the in-ears. So if you are not getting a board feed of the drums, which some guys don't get, find out if you can get a microphone feed into your headphone system so that you can hear. I have a friend who did this. He was running basic tracks. He had a headphone amp, and he also had another feed for his a mic that was near his drums to get his drum sound, and he turned that fader down. He had the monitoring of the tracks and the click on another fader. So he was basically using a small mixer is what he was doing. And then he was feeding it into the headphone output. He was using that as the preamp, and then he had his in-ears in. So there's lots of different ways to do this. There's not only one way to do it, but I would say the main thing is have a feed into a headphone amplifier. You have control of the volume. Okay. By the way, they do this sometimes now digitally. They can do it like we use a Q-Mix at this church I was playing at. I didn't like it at first, but once I understood how it worked and understood how to protect my ears, it worked fine. That's the key. You also want to make sure you can control the other volumes that are going to be changing on you. You want to make sure you've got a personal mix that you control the mix. That's the other thing if you're playing in churches. That's where the Avion boxes really work, because you could basically touch the box and touch faders. Just like on this iPad, I can adjust things on the iPad. A lot of times when I'm doing a track, the first thing I do with the track is I bring it down really low, and then I decide how loud I want the track to be. So that's all part of using in-ear monitors. Anyhow, Joel, I hope that gives you an idea. Look at the costs, put in-ear monitors in. You can see that ranges from like $30 to thousands of dollars for these things. This direction is very expensive, but you can find something in the middle that will work and are good. The names you want to look at are Sennheiser, Westone, Audio-Technica, Shure. Those are pro-level names. If you get into some of the other level names, like Behringer's never considered a pro-level name, and a lot of, except for the Behringer X32 boards. I mean, they became pro-level. But I never think of their headphones or anything as being pro-level. So, but you can find all kinds, try them, read the reviews, check them out. That'll help you. All right. Anyhow, that was the last question from Joel. Thank you for watching Ask Earl Anything. Your questions make the show. Without your questions, I don't have a show. And I just want to thank you for watching. Everybody, have a great March. I will try to drop in a few more minis if I get some early questions. And everybody, have a great day. Bye.